Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. During our weekly episodes, we explore this intersection of spirituality and psychology, and as a result, we capture timeless wisdom containing both fields. I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and joining me today is someone that I consider a very special guest, someone who has dedicated much of his work to understanding, exploring, and discussing this intersection of spiritual wisdom and human growth. Please welcome Yuri Castro. Yuri, how you doing?
I'm very good. Hello to everyone who's listening or watching us. It's always an honor to be here.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Yuri, today I'm proposing we have this conversation that I hope to be enlightening to all of us, including myself, right? Let's dive into some of the teachings by Joanna de Angelis because I would like to discuss this idea of an evolutionary journey of the self, right? How do we get to this? How do we understand even the path and how this path can lead us to hmm, a true sense of inner transformation? And I would like Yuri to welcome, right, as I said before. And I know that everyone here with me today are eager to also hear from you and receive some nuggets of enlightenment as we explore this deep insights that Jonah de Angelis has offered us on the topic of the journey of the self. Yuri, in her teachings, Joanna de Angel speaks of this existence. This I touch myself in my shoulder every time I think about this body, right? This corporeal, earthly existence. And while we are in a time where everybody, and I hear that from many different platforms and or channels, many people called we live only once, right? Make sure that you enjoy life, and there's always this touch points that tells us in the wide stream general areas of input of our lives that life is brief. We right, physical life is brief, I agree, but that we in this the brevity of life, corporeal life, that we have to go with a gusto and really enjoy every aspect of sensorial, physical, tangible experience for it to have some meaning. But Joanna de Angelis, she speaks of this existence from a different point that I would like for us to talk. She speaks about this valuable learning experience, right? So we're here to learn, and she says that the learning experience points to the idea of the self, right? In a, as a the higher essence of ourself taps into the collective unconscious. So, from that perspective, we can think that a journey to the self, right, is a journey that it will be fraught, will be filled with moments of joys and triumphs, as well as the moments where we try, we fail, we get hurt, right? But in these ups and downs, if you will, we are ultimately leading ourselves into the goal of integrating our ego, the unconscious mind, and lead us to what she calls this primordial archetype, which is our divine essence, the God within, right? So, Yuri, sending to you some thoughts. Let's maybe start by, if you will, unpacking what is Joanna trying to say, right? In your experience, how can we, with your own words, understand this idea of integration of the ego and the unconscious. How can we tap into that concept in more practical terms? What does it even look like in our day-to-day lives?
Perfect. I think you have some very interesting thoughts there. The idea is, I mean, when we're thinking about the self with a capital S, as Joanna says, as Carl Jung says, we're
Mhm.
thinking about this integration. So this process of this of integration as we go through life is extremely important because, as you said very well, nowadays there is this sort of culture or this understanding of the YOLO, you only live once. So we try
Mhm.
to please our senses. We try to make everything that's material better in an attempt to make us feel better, the inside feel better. But the reality of it is, yes, this life is brief when compared to the immortality of the soul, to the full individuation, for the accomplishment of the self with a capital S. When we fully integrate that, as we saw with our master Jesus, the biggest and greatest example we've had of a being that has reached this process of the individuation and was extremely integrated and still came here to teach us. So this idea, I think, of the integration, yes, it will pass through, as you said very well, these trials and tribulations and these challenges that we have to go through. We have to overcome them because, as
Mhm.
Joanna says very well, in her books, she's always talking about how one is always growing. The person is always growing at every existence. Every time that we are here on earth, we're learning something every time. Like, and I'm speaking of earth, so it's shorter for us to understand. But every time we're here, we're incarnated. We are definitely learning something as we go through life. And I think this process, the trials and errors and the mistakes that we make, they serve to, and we can talk about the shadow as well eventually, but for us to understand a little bit more of the shadow, a little bit more of the ego, and the understanding of how everything sort of connects.
Yeah, I love it. And I think two things, Yuri. Number one, when we talk about all the elements, right, that comes to play in this material existence, this incarnation, this life that we live as our personality, it's almost like a play or even a movie, right? The actor
Yes.
comes in, and there are all the sets of circumstances, the plot, the aptitudes, the attitudes of the actors, how that actor, that the character that the actor plays really brings into certain elements that will lead to the ultimate, in the fiction perspective, right, the ultimate goal of resolution of a major conflict. I think it speaks to us in our own journeys, right? We
Yes.
all
Hmm.
of this, yeah, this orchestration of what is life, the family that we are born from, the education, the set of friends. If we, for example, for I know a lot of people here, Yuri, that are uh, people that their parents were part of the armed, the army or navy, etc. And as that lifestyle, they kept moving every 2 years in a different city, in a different country, a different continent, right? And their journeys are much more different than, for example, mine. I was born in this house, and until I got married, that's the only structure, physical structure that I called home, the same city. Therefore, my identity are in all of the things that I call home are deeply integrated with that site, that physicality, those people in the neighborhood, so on and so forth, right? But another aspect that you mentioned here brought me a thought, right? The YOLO thought process. You only live once, and this desire, the zest for life, really equates with, as you mentioned, pleasing our senses. And the inherent paradox of that is because we are focused on fulfilling our lives with opportunities for, say, experiences or whatever it is that we can touch, right? The more tactical, tangible part of our lives. But it's really a symptom of our emptiness, that
Yes.
existential, right? Existential emptiness. And the more we address that emptiness with things that are ephemeral, the more empty we become, right?
Yes, I think again you're touching on very important psychological topics because again this idea of pleasing our senses and pursuing material pleasures, this is very much ingrained and on par with our own evolution as spirits. We are in a planet that is very much materialistic and where the matter still exerts a strong influence on us given our evolution as immortal spirits. So it
Right.
is only natural and that we would find the matter exerting this much control over our thoughts, control over what we're going to do. We even have in our brains, the way they are developed, we have these dopamine pathways
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
where let's say social media or material pleasures, they give us this quick reward of dopamine, this
Yes.
quick shot of
Right.
dopamine
Yeah. Yes.
on demand nowadays even so it
Yeah.
becomes very much that addictive sort of personality or addictive persona to the pleasures and the material things. So it is very much tied to what you said, this the emptiness. It's also tied to this idea of we're still evolving, we're still very materialistic because of our condition as spirits, because of the planet that houses us in this evolutionary process that we're currently in. And if I may add another thing too, when you mentioned it, it made me think of, when you said the emptiness, made me think of Joanna de Angelis in her books when
Hmm.
she's talking. She's saying, she goes to say that there is a natural tendency for some people to feel sad. She says there's a
Yeah.
natural tendency for some people, especially like nowadays, human beings to have this melancholic state and feel this sadness. And she even brings it up that sometimes this sadness, now diving into a little more of the psychological aspect, she's saying that this sadness oftentimes is the guilt that was internalized and is being externalized as self-punishment from other reincarnations.
Yeah.
So again, showing this continuum of our existence and how everything interconnects. The things we still need to learn, they very much interconnect with things that we may have made a mistake in a past life, or we may have not gathered that lesson yet. So we need to come here and then try again and learn from it again. What do you think?
Yeah. I love it. I love the where you're putting here the root cause, if you will, right? We feel
Yes.
something, we may feel empty, we may feel sad. I tend to, if I look at the landscape of my community, right, Yuri, the majority of individuals that I know, and I'm speaking to professional speaking, right, very, very, very successful people, financially, with their family, their meeting their objectives. Everything is on par, yet the level of anxiety, Yuri, is unbelievable. And
Mm-hmm.
so my heart cries when I see that. And we can think about it, that living is not for the faint of heart. We all are somehow subject, but even then, the anxiety for having to meet the standards and demands of this world, right?
Yes.
It's counterbalanced to what you're saying, and that is a topic that Joanna brings whenever she's speaking about guilt. That somehow the root cause of it all, for the sadness or even for the anxiety, etc., or any other psychological, behavioral issues that we're going through, psychological and behavior issues, we are really talking about the fragmented, right, area of our psyche, our soul, our spirit is going through life, but feeling very much not whole, not it just grasping between the duality of living life as a spirit in the material world. So those polarities keep almost like a ping pong. I'm here, but I'm not there, and I'm there, but I'm not here.
Yes.
Right? So we're
Absolutely, ping pong is a great way of looking at it, and also one thing that ties very well with what you said, and I think is this idea of free will that Joanna de Angelis so aptly talks about in her books. This idea of through our reincarnations that we have the free will is what allows us, is this instrument that allows us to choose. And she says between good or evil, joy or sadness, like she gives opposites like that. And I
yeah,
really appreciate that part in her saying that, because she then says that the only determinism, the only fatality that exists is plenitude. So like the
yes,
only
love it.
the only thing that is certain and is this that's it's determined is that we will reach plenitude, that we will reach this process of individuation, that we'll reach that point eventually, a long time from now, I think. But
Yeah.
we will reach that point. So that's a beautifully optimistic way of looking at something that seems sometimes so drastic, so drab, even where we're thinking, oh, deterministic, it's bad, we're doomed to suffer. No, we're doomed for plenitude, we're doomed for quotation marks, and doomed for
Yes.
we're destined to plenitude.
So Yuri here, right? You are referencing actually the content of two books that I love, by the way, by Joanna de Angelis. Number one is The Integral Human Being.
Yes.
Right, so she speaks about all the things that potentially are distracting us from ourselves or moving away from ourselves, and the need, if you will, to integrate, to create a sense of wholeness into our journeys in that book, The Integral Human Being. And the next book in her series is Plenitude, that you just referenced, where in the movie she talks about many different things. But one of the items, Yuri, that in that's the third book of the series, I believe, Plenitude, in that she suggests that this journey, if we're talking about the journey of the self, right? This journey that we go through allows us to confront, but also overcome psychological conflicts. So we talked about this before, right? Yuri, the idea of all the suffering that the journey in a physical existence are really inherent in those paths, in our choices, free will, right, and the consequences of our choices. But she suggests that as we are, overcoming, transcending our conflicts, psychological conflicts in this case, as we do that, it really a mechanism, it's a catapult for us to free from the burdens from the past, right? So as we become freer in fear, once we overcome those conflicts, we are able or enabled, if you will, to be closer to a, how can I say, an understanding of the divine within. So it seems that this process can also tie quite well. So we're talking about plenitude, we talked about the integral human being, but with also tying with the idea that Carl Gustav Jung brought to us, the idea of individuation, which, you know, in so many words, just means that in the process of individuation, you, Yuri, you here in our life, and me, we all becoming our true, authentic selves. Can you speak a little bit more about the psychological conflicts and how it is important for us to face them, not hide away from them, so that we can overcome?
Absolutely. And I think, again, it goes through this idea, as you're saying before, of life. There's no life without pain. The life that we know, there's no life without pain or suffering. The suffering, we discussed this in a different episode of this podcast. But this idea that we should see, or could see perhaps, the suffering, the shortcomings, the pain that we sometimes face as instruments for our own process of this integration that you're talking about, this eventual the reaching of our plenitude. So the integration of the process is looking at the conflicts that we still have within us, because it's internal. We bring with us these conflicts from other lives, from other points of our existence, and we must face them. We must address them. We must uncover them, understand them. And I'll just make a parenthesis here, oftentimes with professional help. But the eventual goal is to uncover them, understand them, so we can address them, because otherwise they're not going to go away on their own. They're not going to, if they continue to be unsolved or unresolved, perhaps we can say, they're going to carry on. If we have something that we must accomplish, let's say, now more on the spiritual side, if we have something we must accomplish in this life, or we set forth as our goal, and we're shying away from that, we're hiding from that, but we need that specific thing to reach the next level, we will have to face it eventually. So it becomes important for us to understand that there is no running away from these conflicts eventually. We need to uncover them, we need to address them and treat them.
Yeah. So back to your idea specifically of the role of free will, right? And
oh yes.
so we understand that from spiritualistic, spiritist, and Joanna de Angelis, how they bring the notion of free will. It's the idea that through our reincarnation and through our repeated prior experiences in this lifetime, but before this one, I love that the free will is this incredible treasure that each one of us have in our hands every moment of our lives. And it is the idea that we are given the choice, right? The freedom to choose, but also in that mechanism of free will, and of course the cause and effect, right? That is part of that
Yes.
free will. We are given the chance to grow. We're given the chance to learn from failures and successes, but ultimately we're given the chance to forge this path to shape our destinies, right? Can you comment? And I'd love for you to hear. I don't know why, but the thought popped in my mind, Yuri, that as I said, we are given the chance to forge our path. And somebody was telling me that the current I don't know if you have any work with that or any experience, but as a parent, maybe you do, but the current generation of parents are no longer considered called the helicopter parents, right? That hover around looking to make sure the kids are all right. But now they are the generation of the lawnmower parents, where they are actually creating the path for their children instead of allowing the children to choose their own path, allowing the children to fail and learn from their failure. Any thoughts on that? Have you thought about it? You as a young parent, right?
Yes, and what you're referencing, I think it's from the book The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and it's a
Yeah.
great book on psychology, bestseller I think last year or the year before. And he mentions something. He makes that analogy where he says that there is no more helicopter. Not there's no more. Usually, I mean, before there were a lot of helicopter parents, but now the generation, he says, is the snow plower. So like it's
Yeah.
just
The snowplow.
trucking
Okay.
the snow plower, just extremely like removing everything in its path, or just destroying everything, creating the path, not necessarily being the helicopter watching the child and everything. Because again, we are and we are going through this period of transformation, and if we talk of planetary transition, all of that, but bringing more to ourselves, our own lives, we're seeing this change in society in general, especially the Western world, where we see this idea of the snowplower, let's call it the snowplower parent,
Yeah.
where they don't want their children to suffer, they don't want their children to see pain, they don't want their children to have to discover things on their own. Everything is so easy nowadays because technology has allowed for a lot of comfort in our lives and a lot of safety. But the problem with the safetyism, which is a term that Jonathan Hay, the author, uses, the problem with the safetyism is exactly this idea that we are depriving them, we're robbing their experiences for growth, we're robbing that necessary growth, such as the caterpillar to become butterfly needs to break out of the shell themselves.
Mhm.
If we go there, we cut it open, the butterfly dies. So
Yeah.
this idea of we need to face some things on our own as children as well, and as parents we must be aware of that they will encounter suffering out there, that they will encounter suffering even inside their own as they grow up, and if they find themselves without the tools.
Yeah. And it's very interesting. With the sense of safetyism, right? It is the concept that is born out of love. Would you agree?
It is 100% born out of love, and as a parent, like, I'm always conscious of trying to
Mhm.
like walk that line of how much free reign should I give, and if I'm seeing something they're playing on a playground, how much should I intervene and when should I intervene. But if they're doing some risky things to develop their bodies and their minds and their reflexes, I must allow that. Even if I see it, I'm like, oh, I'd rather be there under them to hold them if they fall. But
Yeah.
it's sort of this conscience of they need to go through that. They need to learn. If they fall, and then they will learn from that.
I have to share two things from my own experience, if it's okay, Yuri. But I was the considered in a family of six. I was considered the perfect child, a young child, like no problem at school, loved to read, loved to study, never ever ever went against my parents' will or dictum, right? To do this, do that. I was this obedient child uh, until I was no longer. That's what happens, adolescence, right? And I went through so many disruptions that was very interesting. But my mom would say to me when she could see clearly that I was in the crash course to very bad choices, right? Right at that age, and she would say, "Honey, right? Don't do it. You will blah blah blah." And I would tell mom, "Let me fail." And she said, "Why would I do that to you? Because you're going there, but I have already been there." She would reference two-way street, right? That she already been there and came back and has learned from her own failure. So she did not want me to fail like her. So I thought it was very interesting, this battle of wills, where I would say, "Let me fail, mother, please."
Absolutely, absolutely. It's an interesting piece that you bring, because yes,
Oh,
as parents, if
uh,
we could choose to have our children never to suffer, never to have pain, we would choose so.
yeah,
Out of love. The safetyism is born out of love. We want to create a safe environment, we want to create everything that's safe, but we also need to understand that when they go out there,
yeah,
when they go to school, when they go to work, when they eventually build their own families, when
hmm,
their life carries on, we're not going to be there, and they will suffer. They will have pain. They will have challenges that we won't be there. to help them, because one, we sometimes we can't, and two, it's unfeasible. So it is this constant process of maturing as a parent, understanding how much should I let them fail and how much should I help, and when tying back to our conversation of this path of the journey of the self, of this path of inner transformation, we think of ourselves also like the adults who are listening to this,
Yeah.
of how we were as kids, how we were raised, and all of that. What do we bring, and also what do we bring from our past experiences, from our past lives? Because
Yeah.
those children that we have next to us, these are immortal spirits. They carry some luggage with them that we don't know about, at least consciously we don't know
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
So we must understand that they have their own challenges, and sometimes if we try to take the opportunity away from them, we may be robbing an opportunity, a moment for them to learn something they need to learn.
Yeah, it's very quite interesting and remarkable, right? The that you bring to us the family unit, right? This cell, that the most important cell of our society, our world, is each
Mm-hmm.
family member, and how we two contradictory things. Number one is that we're there to provide that imprint. And the idea here, Yuri, is that I always remember St. Francis of Assisi, right, where he would say, preach the gospel all the time. When and if you need it, use your words. I
Mm-hmm.
love that, because our our examples, right, are indeed what has this indelible imprint in our children. No matter how much freedom they have or not have to make mistakes or be successful, they see us as parents and they emulate from what we do, our choices. It's our imprinting, if you will. But the other aspect of it, if I may say here, is what you brought up. And I just wanted to repeat from my own words the idea that in that cell, while the parents are imprinting through their examples, their I guess the compass, right? The North Star that we hold dear and true, that passes on to the next generation. We, all of those family members, we are all immortal spirits, meaning that, how old is your youngest child, Yuri?
The oldest is 5.5, the youngest is 1.5.
Well, let's pretend that 1.5 year old child may be the oldest spirit, right? It
Oh
could
yeah.
be, and the most experienced, the most enlightened. It does not mean that you, as a father, will not do everything to the best of your ability, knowledge, and intention to help mold and love the child, right? But it could be that the child is actually going to teach all of you in your family with the enlightenment that he already brought to this life, right? So I love if we can perhaps talk a little bit about how the concept of free will interconnects with the concept of reincarnation in this context of spiritual growth, right?
Yes.
How do those two forces guide us to have this more conscious or even more purposeful existence?
I think one of the things that Leon Denis says, another author that I know
Yeah,
you like as well,
I love it. Yeah,
he says the soul is the author of its own destiny, or something like that. And I love that this idea that this is free will in a sentence. We are the authors of our own destinies. We are the ones that are going to either speed up the process or slow down the process, although progress is inevitable.
yeah,
But we are either going to speed up the process or slow the process based on what I said before. How much of these conflicts are we addressing and trying to improve from? How much
mhm,
are we actually facing inward? Because one of the things too that Joanna, tying to Joanna de Angelis now, says about the idea of the inner transformation
Hmm.
and the inner self, she talks about how trying to remember exactly what it was. How if we basically if we are at peace within, nothing from the outside can disturb us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So like I think that is very powerful
Hmm.
when we think about that. She talks about these adversaries, or the adversaries themselves from the outside. They can't do anything harmful to those, that's what she says, to those who are free within,
Hmm.
to those who are free within. So I think that again, free will, making our own choices and understanding that those choices will have consequences, either positive or negative, either to speed up the process or slow down the process of evolution of our own selves. We understand then that it's very much looking inward and making this change without expecting something from the outside. And I think that is the biggest trap, or the biggest downfall that we oftentimes have when we're trying to go for this journey of, of individuation, or the journey of the self with a capital S. When, let's say, we're working on forgiveness and
Yeah.
we expect the other person, if we make that step, like I'm gonna forgive, and we expect them to forgive us and they don't, all of a sudden it becomes so much harder for us to forgive, and
Yeah.
vice versa. So
Yeah.
expecting something from the outside is this, I like to say, trap, is this thing where it's almost like a pitfall that we have in this journey of self-discovery and inner change. What do you think?
I love it, but I have to go back to what you're saying about forgiveness, right? In this, as you mentioned, because we devoted several episodes in the recent months to discussing or reference the parable of the prodigal son, and what comes to my mind
Excellent.
immediately when you talked about it, Yuri, is the fact that the prodigal son is the young child, right? The youngest child that does fails all of the things that he did, and he comes back through the path of inner transformation, but also before he actually went through his own inner transformation, the path of awakening his own consciousness, right? He goes, I would imagine, this is my words, in 2000 years ago in Palestine, very different. But let's pretend he is a young man today, and he goes like, "Oh my goodness, what did I do? Right, I really made a big mistake. What to do? What to do?" And he comes back, and he comes back not only with a sense of guilt for doing it wrong to the father, to the community, to everyone, right? To himself, but in a sense of humility, he comes back to confess to what he before was a very naive young person doing all sorts of wrong, right? But he comes back asking for forgiveness, and the father, what does he do, Yuri? He forgives immediately,
Uh-huh.
unconditionally. He just embraces him. He kisses the young man upon his return. What I find it interesting here, what you're talking about, is the fact that the older brother is quite upset when he sees the father forgiving. It's not about uh, the act of forgiveness, but this is something that we need to be aware. Somehow, somewhere in our lives, when we fail and we hurt, and due to all the movements that we go through in our path of self-discovery and inner transformation, we will ask and receive forgiveness. But they're outsiders of this process that may not be yet at a point to even accept the forgiveness that is happening outside. Do you know what I mean? He was really taken. How, Father, could you do this? How could you forgive? As if forgiveness was something bad, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
really like that idea for us to be aware. Have we done that? How have
Mm-hmm.
we? seen somebody that, let's say, this is completely fictitious, but I know somebody that did some really, really difficult things to Yuri, right? To you specifically, Yuri. And but the two of you reach a state of forgiveness, and I go like, no, 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 no. The drama in my head still fraught with conflicts. I am still judging that person for hurting you. Isn't it interesting how those conflicts can linger in our minds beyond the conflict itself being resolved?
Absolutely. And the parable, I love you brought it up because just something
Mhm.
John also talks about, the prodigal
Yeah,
son.
yeah,
It's very much applicable today.
yeah,
It is one of those another one of those thousands of things that Jesus said that
hmm,
is very much applicable today. And we have these, the three, let's call it the characters of the story, the two
hmm,
sons and the father. And it's interesting because Joanne is talking about how we must go and face these experiences and then come back. So like we get out of ourselves to get in,
yeah,
inside our own selves and make that change in a way. And
yeah,
I love this sort of like imagining this movement of going out to go in, or going out and
yeah,
then to
yeah,
discover something inside of us. And what did the father do? The father allowed him to go, which is interesting as well. Most people don't focus on the beginning of the parable as well,
yeah,
understanding that the when the young son, said to his father like, "Oh, I want
mhm,
my shares of the state," like everything he was asking, even though the father knew it was not probably not going to end well from the material sense, the
yeah.
father
He
eventually
said,
let the young son go, which is
yeah,
very much what we were talking about before. Like he let the young son go, his youngest go, and then once he made those mistakes that that father in the parable probably predicted, he
yeah,
comes back and he embraces him. He's the merciful father, and of course Jesus was making this parable to illustrate this idea of our heavenly Father, of God being this merciful being that allows us to have free will, such as the father of the parable,
yeah.
and allow us to exercise our free will to go and make mistakes, but then we learn from those mistakes. And this is something very valuable from the parable, to
Mm,
understand that the youngest son learned from his mistakes, came back with humility,
yeah.
and saw a merciful father embracing him.
And I have to say, I mentioned to you my mother in my prior dialogue with her many lifetimes ago, it feels like, right? Decades ago. She, like this parable, was very merciful. She knew, she knew it. And I somehow influence her to accept me, to keep going on that course that I forged and head on toward failure. She knew it. So when I came back, hurt and all sorts of consequences from choices, she was there, Yuri, and she embraced lovingly
Uh,
toward me. Yeah. And so I think again, not only the parable, the words by Jesus as Luke brings to us. I think it's chapter 15, right?
15,
Verse,
yes.
yeah, verses I think 11 to 32. So it's a relatively short parable, but it is so contemporary if you start to look at it from all the lessons that it gives to us, right?
And then you look at the older son as well, like you said. So the youngest one set off to a distant country, everything went wrong, and he came back, and the father embraced him. And the oldest son was angry and
Yeah,
envious, and
yeah, yeah,
they don't want what happened with his younger brother, like him receiving everything. And
yeah.
what does the father do? Also embraces the older son. So again,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
understanding
yeah.
this difference in these two spirits, the younger and the oldest son, just how important it is to embrace both of them, to meet them where they're at with love.
Yeah, because if you think about it, right, the father is completely, he has reached the journey of the self, right? He's
Yeah.
there. The young son is completely not, and he goes da da da, and it sets the the process of course correction. So when he gets to the worst of the worst, right, the deepest end, he
Mm-hmm.
comes back. There's no more where he can go and fall even beyond that. He has reached the worst of the worst. Then he comes back on a different movement toward himself. And I think this is for all of us. This is a lesson of, be kind to yourself, even when you're still going toward the wrong direction in terms of using your free will, and dealing with a lot of difficulties. We're still coming back, and we are able to come back and go back to the Father. But as you said, the other brother, he is not there yet, right? He's stuck in a world of egoic judgment. He's still, in my opinion, this is my opinion, everyone. I believe the older brother was thinking, oh my goodness, he's coming back, Yuri. He's coming back and he wants more of the inheritance. What can I do to control? What I can do is not forgive him and interfere in the father to forgive, because if the young son was quote unquote dead, there would be no more impact to the material existence that the older son has. One of the things that is very interesting as well, and in the book by Haroldo Dutra on the parables, right? He discussed many, many different parables, but in this one, he gives us a historical point of view, right? What was happening first century Palestine, and he brings to us an awareness that if somebody had made the same terrible choices and mistakes as the youngest child had done, Yuri, he would have been expelled,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Right? The expelled, get out of here, get out of my house, get out. And but the bit of a tribe, right? A very small community of people that live in that place would most likely had judged him just like the older brother judged, and you would have stoned that young man to death for what he did. So it's very interesting, right? The idea of can we shift our our thoughts, our ideas, our judgment, and look at this beautiful parable and look at it. How can I be forgiven? Even when I have all the right to not, can I be the bigger one here?
Yes, and I mean, it is very much what you're saying, and I'm thinking of, again, the Father.
Uh-huh.
And the parable was spoken 2,000 years ago,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah,
And if we think about it, it's still very much applicable today when we're not, at least, stoning people anymore. So the idea is, back then, what he said, what Jesus said, and when he said it, was probably extremely outrageous for anybody to hear that and
yeah.
think, there's no way a father would do that. And we don't even have to go that far, because the parable says that the son squandered the money with property, with prostitutes, and a lot of,
Oh,
again, material things that we talked about, the material pleasures. We
yeah.
don't even need to go that far if we think of Paul, or before, when he was Saul of Tarsus, and
Yeah,
how his
yeah,
father basically treated him, and he didn't do half the things that the younger son in the in the parable has said. And so we can definitely see how, taking into the context of the zeitgeist, or like the
yes.
whatever was happening in that moment in time, culturally speaking, it was extremely unheard of a father to do that. And the older son is sort of speaking as the collective voice of the people,
I love
who are
it. Yeah,
saying, the voice who's saying, there's no way, why are you showering him with all of this, love, all of these material things, killing our fattened calf, and the robe, the mantle, I forgot exactly what piece of clothing it was, but the ring and all of those
yeah,
things. Why are you doing that after all he has done for our reputation? Because
yeah,
family back then was also very tied to the reputation. It wasn't just the squandering of the material things, but how did you do it? So you're staining, the or tainting the name of the family. And the younger
Right.
son has done that. So the
Yes.
older one is basically the voice of the people back then. And it's
Yeah.
so interesting to think that.
Yeah. I love where you're going, right? Because it is the zeitgeist, the spirit of an era, and we're talking about 2 millennia ago. But Yuri, if you go back to today, right? What is our zeitgeist in relationship to judgment? I think the stones that we metaphorically throw at each other uh, has become an all times violence, and all times peak of violence of just coming from everywhere, because we do have things such as social media where my
Hmm.
opinions are the stones, right? I can stone you, Yuri. I can so easily. I can crucify you. I can kill you with my words, my opinions, and made it publicly like a stoning, and there's very little that you can do once it's cast, right?
Yes, because technology has what it has done is has
Hmm.
expanded as mean like in terms of expansion this village.
Yeah, yeah,
Before it
yeah,
was just a community, as you're saying, and
yeah,
things didn't get broadcast that much. But now the metaphorical stones can come from all corners of the world because technology has allowed for that.
yeah, yeah. But Yuri, surprisingly, we are at the end of our time. Do you have any final thought that you would like to bring to everyone here before we go?
I guess just in the same vein of this inner transformation is to understand that we must transform ourselves inwardly first,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
not the outward aspect will come after we
yeah,
transform the inner aspect. That inner
yeah,
aspect, the transformation of that, is rife with pain and challenge and shame and all those things that we must face in
yeah.
order to accomplish it. So let's not give up in our journeys.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you, and to leave my final words, which is acknowledgement that one of the most uh, impactful parts of what Joanna teaches and that we brought today, really full frontal, right, is the idea that the psychological and spiritual growth are deeply interconnected, right, Yuri? And as such, Joanna de Angelis brings suggestions or ideas that whenever we face struggles, when we confront our challenges, we're actually opening ourselves up to the potential. It's not a fatal thing, but we are actually, as we struggle, as we are challenged, as we fail, that's when we are opening for our potential inner transformation, inner growth, and getting to where we need to be from that journey of the self, right? To embark on the path for inner transformation. So I want to just say thank you. Thank you, Yuri. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode. I do hope this very informal conversation has inspired you as much as it has inspired me to take the next step, right? Let's go together on our own journey toward our self, right? And until next time, I just want to say, let us all embrace the idea of continuous evolving, continuous growth, continuous curiosity, and seeking answers. But for you, if this is the first time that you are listening to a program, please take a note that our psychology and spirituality weekly talks are based, you must have taken note of the works by Joanna de Angelis, and we do hope that you're able to perhaps expand your own concepts on, by juxtaposing spirituality and psychological concept. We want to also thank you, not only beyond you, Yuri, all of our sponsors, Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, AME Brazil, the Brazilian arm of the Medical Spiritist Association. We'll be back next week with another episode, so stay tuned. Until then, please take care and keep embracing the journey. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.